Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Teresa Tyus, and I am an institutional support consultant here with Trellis. And our webinar today is titled Improving New Student Matriculation by Improving Customer Service. And we have our very own Steve Smith, Director of Higher Education Services, who will be presenting today. So as I always ask, as you're coming in the room, please come on in, have a seat. If you can let us know what institution you're representing today, we would truly appreciate it. We like to know who all is joining us. It's not a must, but if you can, we truly would appreciate it. And then also I'd like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. I will be sending out the webinar recording as soon as it's available. We do have a Q&A feature, so if you have any questions, please feel free to use that feature. Or if you like to use the chat, I will be moderating or actually monitoring that throughout the session as well. So I'll be looking at that. So I see you coming in. I see Alcorn State. We have Houston Tillotson, Sul Ross Jarvis, Houston Christian University, Amarillo College, Texas A&M University, San Antonio. We have quite a few people. Savannah State, Lone Star Montgomery, Baytown Lee College. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, and another thing, we will have a very, I'll say quick survey at the end of this webinar. So if you could take the time to complete that, we would appreciate it as well. And as you're coming in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So let me tell you a little bit about Steve. Steve is the Director of Higher Education Services at Trellis. He has worked in higher education for over 30 years. He was an academic program administrator and financial aid officer at the City University of New York. Later, he worked in public relations, policy and regulatory affairs, and strategic planning at Texas Guaranteed. From 2005 to 2017, he was the Vice President of Academic Affairs and then President of Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts. Since 2017, Steve has worked at Trellis, focusing on student success and retention. He provides consulting, planning, and training to colleges and universities on enrollment management and student customer experience. So welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for presenting for us today. So this webinar will introduce a simple dashboard that colleges can consider to help manage a customer-friendly application cycle at your institution.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you to all of our close friends who have joined us today for this discussion. Again, my name is Steve Smith. I know many of you. I've been to many of your campuses and talked about the enrollment dashboard we're going to talk about today, but I've also been to many of your campuses to talk about customer service in higher education. Both of these things are very, very important to me. This webinar is going to combine how we can create a customer experience for students and create a higher level of enrollment in our offices and a simpler level of enrollment in our offices by making it more customer service oriented. I'm going to talk about a few concepts that we've talked about here to try to show you how this works, and then and food for thought about maybe the future of enrolling new students in college. So let me just, talk about, for those of you who have been through my customer service training, you know that one of the 5 principles of customer service I always talk about is see what the student sees, which means let's make sure that when we are doing anything at the college, we're doing it from the student's point of view, not our point of view, the student's point of view, including the enrollment process. Are we making it about the student, or are we making it about us? Let's make it about the student. That's what we're talking about today. So helping new students can matriculate can be difficult. We all know this. It is hard to get a student to, enroll in college because there's a lot going on to make that happen. So it can be difficult. I understand that. The students are making a choice. They're making a choice between your college. They're making a choice between another college, or at many of our institutions, they're making a choice between not going to college at all. So that is what we're up against. competition is between other colleges, but it's also just a competition between college versus no college. And that is the one that I really think we have an opportunity to turn around. And just remember that what we're talking about in college, we know how it works. We understand the terms, the processes, but a first-generation student who has no experience, their family has no experience, this may be mysterious to them, may be confusing to them, and they may opt out of going just because it seems too hard, seems too complicated, seems too expensive. And the reality is we know it can be done, but they may not know it can be done until we make it clear to them. So we need to turn the experience around, focusing on student first, not us first. And that's what we're talking about today. So we need to make the process clear, simple, understandable to the student. Now, this is one thing I'm going to talk about. So often for the past years, we have said, if we want more students, we need more applications. We need to get more applications. We do need more recruiting. But I'm going to talk today about maybe we don't need more applications. We might be able to make our enrollment goals with the applications we already have. Now, this is a concept that, when you go out and talk to people, they're always going to want to get you more leads, more prospects, more applications, but we might be able to make our enrollment goal with the existing application flow if we make that existing application flow more customer friendly and more efficient, which is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to make it more customer friendly for the student, and we're going to make it more clear internally too. When we internally try to get that student through our process, are we coordinating every step behind the scenes to make it work for the student? That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to put the student first, okay? Now, what I'm going to start is many schools already have enough applications. If you are an open enrollment college, or close to open enrollment, if you have 8 times the number of applications than you expect to be for your new student class, you may have enough applications already. And a lot of the colleges I talk to say, we have that many applications, but are you getting those students to day one? Let's talk about how we might be able to do that by creating a high level of customer experience and a high level of, just good, solid efficiency in our office. This is a easier way to meet your enrollment goal than recruiting, because new recruiting is expensive. It's untested. We have to go out there, talk to people who, may not have heard of our college. Maybe our college may be too far away for them. We have to maybe send recruiters out for a night of travel, hotel. Recruiting is expensive. New applications is expensive. That may be required in some cases, but let's not start there. Let's start by saying, if we have around 8 times the number of applications that we need new students, we may have enough already. Let's get them through our process. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. So that's that's a preview of what's yet to come. But let's talk a little bit about higher ed today. Okay. It wasn't always this hard. Right now, we have a challenge. For the past 80 years, college enrollments have gone up and up and up. So for many of us, we're accustomed to the good days when, students applied to our college, getting application flow wasn't really that hard. Getting students to start, we had college enrollments were going up, demographics were on our side, so it wasn't not that hard. But it's now hard because of several things. One, birth rates have changed. We know this. Attitudes have changed. We know this. There are challenges to the old way of doing business in enrollment that we have to come to terms with. But here's the thing. We, the college, still have buildings, faculty, staff. We still want to keep our enrollment steady because we want to keep our college vibrant, right? So we want to keep our enrollment around where it has been because that's what we built. We want to keep it there, and maybe we can through some things. So here's the thing. Here's the past, 80 years or so, up. And then around the beginning of 2020 or so, or even a little earlier, you start seeing just growth. It's now just more stability. It's not, just it isn't going up and up and up and up all the time. So, just normal application flow may not be what it used to be. And then some of you have heard about this thing called the cliff. And this refers to the number of high school graduates for the next 10 years is going down. Why? Because, back a few years ago, the birth rates fell. And so in many parts, this isn't equal in every part of the country, but generally across the United States, high school graduates are going down. That's what's often called the cliff. But I don't want to get too focused on the cliff because the cliff is not our only issue. We also have attitude changes. Look, this survey was conducted by the Wall Street Journal and the University of Chicago just 2 weeks ago. And what did it say? And they do an opinion poll about a number of things going on in American life. And this one was about college. More people said that college was not worth it than said it was worth it. That's scary. More people said it's not worth the cost than said it is worth the cost. Scary. We have attitude changes. The number of people enrolling in college has gone down. Look at this. This is packed over the this top one is the total of students enrolling in college. And you can see the percentage of high school graduates that enroll in college back in 2016, 70%. And then it has gone down. So even though we have a cliff, we have a number of high school students declining, we have a compounding effect, which is the percentage of high school students who enroll is going down because of changing attitudes. So we've got a couple of things. It's not just demographics, it's also changing attitudes. My challenge is going to be, if we change some of those attitudes, if we made it easy on the student, if we made it worth it to the student, could we overcome the cliff? And, and not worry about the cliff so much, but take care of the fact that we have in America, look at this, between 750,000 and 1 million high school students that don't enroll in college at all. Can we get some of those students to come to college by making the process easier, friendlier, understandable to them? I think we can, but that's our challenge. This is students who don't go to college at all, who graduate from high school across the nation. Can we get a few more of those students to come to our college? And look, it's not just high school students. Look at the number of adults between the age of 25 years and 34. We have 17 million people with no college degree between the age of 25 and 34. Those Americans might want to go to college too. So we have opportunity. What the point about this is to say, it's not just, hey, we're doomed. High school birth rates have gone down and therefore there's not as many students. There are still people who need to go to college. Who are they? The people who are opting out because they don't think college is worth it. Maybe we can make it worth it their time. The people who don't enroll because it's too scary, too expensive, too confusing. Let's turn that around and make it worth their time. Maybe the adults. We're used to working with high school students. Maybe we have a serious conversation about supporting a little bit older student at some of our college and make that worth their time. There is opportunity there. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So, it's not inevitable that our enrollments have to go down. There's something we can do about it. We can't change birth rates. We can't do anything about that. But can we change the experience so that students who are there come? So, truth, high school, the number of graduates is going down, but so is confidence in college has declined. Participation in college has declined. So just sending out more recruiters, more flyers, more things like that may not be the first and only answer. Can we focus on the applications we have and try to get a higher percentage of them to enroll through changing the way we do it? And that's what we're going to talk about here. So simple test. Again, I said this in the beginning. How many applications do you have? How many people do you need for the new term? And if the number of people you need, if the number of applications you have is around 8 times the number of new students you need, you might have enough to start with. I've looked across a lot of data. That equation would work for a lot of schools, especially open enrollment colleges. So let's talk about that. So when I work with colleges, I have created to work with many of our colleges a very, very simple little dashboard to help coordinate the work of the several offices in the college that work with new students to try to get us all on the same page. So we are all telling a single story to the student. Okay, and we're going to talk about the dashboard in a little bit. So we know the process of getting a new student means you start with more people and you lose people as you go. You do recruiting, you get applications, then steps have to be taken. The student has to turn in stuff to have a complete application. In many of our schools, that's just a high school transcript, nothing more. But they got to complete that step before they can move forward. And then, we often have an admit process where we, say, hey, welcome to our college. And then the real work starts. We have to talk to the student about, here's how you're going to pay for it. Here's where you're going to live. Here's what you're going to do to register. Here's your classes. Here's your advising. We got to do all these things, and we got to keep the student interested, and we got to keep them engaged, and we've got to make it make sense to the student. Otherwise, this is going to happen. It's all going to fall apart because it's going to be a disjointed narrative. We want our narrative to the student to be unified. We want to be telling a student a single story, not here's a financial aid office story about what you need to do. Here's a housing office story you need to do. Here's a first year experience story of what you need to do. No, here is our college story of what you need to do. And when I work with institutions and I work through this, creating a simple enrollment dashboard, I often find that colleges are telling multiple stories to the student, and it doesn't all fit together in the student's mind as a single cohesive narrative. But we can change that just by a few simple things that we're doing, and that's where we're going to go. So let's talk about the yield. So those of you who are in enrollment management, admissions, or anything like that, you're used to the idea of yield. And yield is the percentage of admitted students who come to your college, the percentage of admitted students who come to your college. And many schools really manage closely because you want a high yield. If you admit them, you want them to come. So the idea is to get as high a yield as possible. The issue, though, is that number may not be that descriptive of what we're trying to achieve for a school that is willing to admit most students who apply, which quite frankly is most schools. Most schools in the United States are not selective institutions. They are not generating gigantic numbers of applications with the intent of admitting a small percentage and having a high yield. You think of the most selective institutions in the country. They generate gigantic numbers of applications, they admit a small number, and they want most of those admitted students to come. That's a high yield situation. And the yield really matters to them because they've admitted a very small number and they want a very large percentage to show up. But for most of us, really, what we're really going for is we want as many applicants to show up as possible. That's not the percentage of admitted students, because quite frankly, we're going to admit most students. If they graduated from high school, they probably are eligible to attend our institution. So really, our work should be measuring the percentage of applicants who come. And that, I think, is maybe a better way for many of us, of operationalizing how we measure our process. How many of the people who applied actually show up as students? Don't worry, the admit process is really more of a challenge of just getting them through our procedures, not, reading essays and looking at SATs and things like that. That's not most of our work. Most of our work is just, if they applied, we want them here. And we can make that work too. Okay. So what we're going to do is kind of focus on those steps, managing those steps to get started. The traditional thing is, I need more students, I need more applications. Again, there may not be more applications to go get right now because of changing things. And plus, getting more applications just costs a lot more money. So and there's all kinds of ways to generate applications, like automatic and things like that. But even if we have an application, we still have to get them through our process. We have to get their high school transcript. We have to make sure they understand financial aid, make sure they understand housing, make sure they understand what classes they're going to take. all of those things. And those are the parts where the real work happens. So that's why we're going to talk about, a simple management tool to make our work fit together behind the scenes so that it makes sense to the student in front of the scenes. So let me give you an example. We see this type of thing a lot. Okay. So, we're doing some simple measurements in the enrollment office, the admissions office. Let's use this hypothetical example. We've got 1,000 new student applications at our college, and 500 of them are complete application, meaning, so what is an application? An application is a form you fill out, name, address, that's a form. Complete application at most schools, form plus high school transcript. That's what a complete application is. Some of you still taking test scores. Maybe you have other documents like residency requirement or whatever, but for the most part, it's your high school transcript. So you take the form, which is called the admission application, plus your high school transcript, and that's a complete application. So I see a lot of this, you see this a lot. We have 1,000 applications, half of them are complete. Now, I can't do anything the rest of the steps until they're complete. In other words, we can't admit them. We can't talk to them about financial aid. We can't talk about housing. We can't really do anything with the application until it's complete. So I've only really got 500 students to work with, not 1,000 here. And now, I'm measuring, various things. How many of them are still engaged 2 months before class? Half of those. How many of them are still engaged 1 month before class? A few less. How many are still engaged 2 weeks before class? A few less. And then it comes time for class to start, and I've got 120 students start my class. So I start out with 1,000 application. By the time it all worked its way out, I have 120 students start class on day one, which works out. Remember, I'm going to measure my simple yield is just going to be the percentage of applicants who start, not the percentage of admitted students, 12%. So in other words, I had 1,000 applicants and 120 students starting. However, so, here's the thing. We really can only work with 500 because that's where we can't move them through the process until they at least complete their application so that we know they're qualified to be a college student. Here's the simple thing, though. What are we doing behind the scenes to make these small improvements that create higher percentages downstream? In other words, can I get not, 500 students to turn in a transcript? Can I get 600 students to turn in a transcript through some effort of my own work? If I can, and maybe doing nothing else, the level of engagement I have for the rest of the process is unchanged completely. All I do is get 100 more students to submit the transcript. And guess what? Now, instead of 120 students sitting in class, I have 145 sitting in class, or a 15% rate. By doing nothing, in this case, I didn't change any of my other processes. All I did was focus on getting more students to submit the transcript. Because remember, until I've completed step one, which is getting them to complete the application, I can't do the rest of the steps. But I will tell you, sometimes I talk to colleges and their internal process is not aligned around these simple fixes. They've got maybe the wrong people devoted to this process or the wrong organization devoted to this process. Maybe they're these simple little fixes that we can do along the way that create opportunity for us that really don't require us to go more recruiting. They don't require us to go get more applications. They just require us to maybe talk to some more people on the phone or help them or, whatever. I have no more applications in this scenario, but I've made some small improvements in my internal process that created, instead of 120, 145 students starting class. Now, so, it's a simple thing, but I will tell you a lot of the time I talk to a college and they don't have metrics around these things. They're not measuring who's moving from step one to step two to step three. Many colleges are just, they're measuring either very little, or they're just measuring the big picture, which is this is how many people started, but they're not measuring what are all the little steps in between. And can I make incremental improvements on those little steps in between to create a better performance, a higher conversion at the end? That's what it means. If we just pay attention to those things, we might be able to make a difference in those things. What if we paid attention to not just one thing, but two things? In other words, I'm going to, in this scenario, I've still got the same 1,000 applications, but now I'm going to tweak my internal process. I'm going to make sure that not 500, but 600 students turn in their transcript. Now I've got something to work with. And now, can I increase the number of people who are still engaged further down because they understand my financial aid packaging or understand my housing better or whatever? Every school's different, but sometimes when I go and I talk to schools, I will find that, they fix this, but then when it comes time to financial aid, maybe they're not making a good story to the students, so they're losing them along the way. So again, I'm going to, make sure that we measure each important step, and are we managing that step so that we keep people moving to the next step? Again, in this scenario, I have not generated any more applications. I've just created higher conversion by measuring the steps and increasing the performance. So in this scenario, hypothetical, now in my original thing, I had 120 students. And then in my second example, I had 145 students. And then this example, I have 168 students, all with the same number of applications. Okay. So that's the idea. Okay. So what we want to do is make sure that we know what the steps are. We are measuring those steps, holding people accountable for those steps, talking about those steps so that we manage the little small steps along the way so that we increase the percentage of students who come. Okay. So the way I've done this with a number of institutions, and maybe some of you on this call, is created like a simple enrollment dashboard. Now, this is a simple tool that allows our team to measure its progress among all the stakeholders. It's not just the admissions office, because getting us new student enrolled is not just an admissions. You got financial aid, housing, registrar, you've got student accounts. A number of offices have to play a part, and they all have to work together on a common dashboard so that the process is a customer friendly to the student. It makes sense as a single story to the student, and that we behind the scenes also see it as a single story. So sometimes I've set up this dashboard with a school, and it's really not that hard. I come to campus for half day, maybe one day, talk to people, work through things, work through your goals. And more often than not, when I talk to a college, I find, hey, this step is not coordinated with that step. And this step doesn't make sense to the student. Maybe work on this. Or who's managing this piece of the pie? Nobody? Oh, we need to fix that. It's usually not hard to find out where the opportunities are by setting this up. So I have a few principles that really try to hone in on this when we set up a little enrollment dashboard. One, every step along the process has to have someone who's responsible for it. And I know we might say, it's the team, but at the end of the day, we need to have a human being, a person with a name attached to that process who's going to report on that process and really be accountable for it. So we need to establish ownership. If it comes to how many students have their housing contract signed, someone is responsible for it with a person who can measure it and who can be responsible for making that happen, making sure that the bill is paid, making sure they're registered. Again, of responsibility, accountability. So we'll set that up. We have to measure it. New student enrollment is a process that it can be measured with numbers. And as we measure them with numbers, we are able to manage it. So we have to measure every step, and we have to measure it all the time. You can't just measure it, once a month. I mean, daily. How many applications do we have? How many completed applications do we have? How many students are packaged? How many students have their housing? This is a daily conversation. And it can be done if we're all putting our numbers and we're all talking together on the same dashboard. We constantly communicate. And then every time we increase the percentage of people who move from one step to the next, more students come to class on day one. That's what we're talking about. So this, I'm going to show you the little dashboard here, but this is kind of what it looks like. It's really just a simple tool. It determines the big steps, how many applications we need, how many completed applications, how many students are we going to admit, and then what are the simple steps to get them to start? What's our goal? We need to know what number we're managing to. And we don't always know that. So that's part of the workshop that I would do at your school is what is the number for this goal? You know, we can't just say, oh, we're getting 5,000 applications. We want 5,000 students to start. You know, that's not realistic. But what is the realistic number? We're going to establish that. What's the time frame that we're going to do that? What's the time frame we're going to collect application? What's the time frame we're going to collect transcripts? What's the time frame we're going to register student? We have to have a time, and then we measure it. How many have done that step today? Are we where we need to be? Are we on target? Are we behind target? If we're on target, great. If we're behind target, what do we need to do differently? And who's responsible? Okay, simple stuff. So I'm going to leave this part of the presentation a second. And I'm going to show you just very quickly what this little dashboard might look like. So let me stop there, and then I'm going to show you this. Okay, so when I talk about a dashboard, I've got a very simple tool that I can, work with the team on to kind of establish some basic things. The first thing I want to know is, I have a database that has, most colleges in here. So I'm able to pull information about your past performance and things like that. So, I've blacked up the name here, but anyway, I could put any college name in here. So really the question is, how many students do you want to have in your college? This is the question that you need to ask on your first thing is, how many students would you want to have in your college? This is, oftentimes I will come to a school and it's not clear how many students do we want to be in our college. Do we want more students than we have today? Same number of students? So you got to start there. Do we want 2,500 students? Do we want 3,000 students? Do we want, we want more students, less students? We want to kind of stay where we're at, whatever. Let's determine how many students we need to be in our college. Then we need to know how many applications do we typically get each year. That's important information that I need to ask the team. Then the rest, I can look at your college's past performance or your IPEDS reporting and kind of see where you're at. In this example, the school has, if this school had, 2,500, they wanted 2,500. I know how many students are approximately going to graduate. I know how many other ins and outs there's going to be. And, then we can kind of tell about how many new students they would need. In this example, this school wants 2,500 students. In order to keep that enrollment of their whole college at about 2,500, they need about 636 new students to make that work. So now we know we need 636 new students. So then we're going to talk about, some of those things, those performance questions that are so important. What percentage of students do we think can complete the application? And those previous slides I showed you, I showed an example of where a school had 50% of its students complete, and another example of where a school had 60%. We're going to talk about this. What percentage of students should be turning in the transcript? What's the number that we can go for? Let's look at our own past performance. Let's look at some benchmarks of what other schools are doing and come up with a goal for ourselves. What percentage of students do we expect to turn in our transcript? We're going to talk about our admission rate. Like I said, most American schools, not all, are close to 100% admission rate. In other words, if you turn in your transcript, you have a spot. But we're going to talk about, are you more selective, less selective? Let's say in this example, this school has a 90% admission rate. In other words, most school students with a high school transcript are welcome at our school. Maybe a few we won't be able to admit, but most. Okay, so we'll put that in there. Okay. And then we're going to talk about, what is our desired percentage of how many students come. We'll have a conversation. We'll set up some goals for ourselves, and then we'll transfer all these numbers over to a simple dashboard that puts those numbers into reaction. Okay. To make this equation work, 636 new students, that's how many students that we need to keep our school where we want to be for a total enrollment perspective. So based on the discussion we had, we need 3,365 applications, 2,356 of those we expect to be complete. Then we're gonna admit 2,120, and then we're gonna set up goals for ourselves for how many students pay their fees, how many students register, how many students are in housing. We're gonna set up a time frame for each of those numbers, and then who's responsible for that step, where they're gonna get their reporting information from, and then we're all gonna work from this dashboard in our daily, weekly, no less frequent than weekly, ideally daily meeting. We're just going to start filling in numbers. We're going to say, okay, Janie, you're in charge of applications. How many do we have today? We're going for 3,365. Oh, Steve, we have 2,000. Well, oh, Jamie, well, we should have 2,821 right now. Why are we behind? Oh, this happened or that happened, or this is going to happen. So it's a discussion. It's not an indictment. It's not necessarily a negative or positive. It just gives us information. And then I go to Israel, who's in charge for making sure all the transcripts are. And I say, Israel, how many transcripts do we have in today? Well, we've got 500 transcripts in today. Really? On this time of year, we should have, 1,500 transcripts. And what are we going to do? Here's my plan, et cetera. And then I go and I talk about ICERs, and I go to our Wong, who's our financial aid director. I say, how many ICERs do we have in today? And Wong says, we got 3,000 ICERs in already. I said, wow. So we're really only going to admit 2,000 students, but 3,000 ICERs. Great. But then I may take the next step. I say, Wong, is there any student who turned in an ICER that hadn't applied for admission? Yes, there are. Well, let's invite them to apply for admission too. It's a conversation. The point is, and we're going to do this with housing, registrar, everybody. And then we're going to find out, is there any link that isn't working? Like maybe, sometimes you'll get down to the housing offices. Well, I haven't released how many beds that we're going to have next year yet. And so we're going to have a discussion of like, well, the students are wanting to know that. So when is that going to happen? We need to know that. Maybe with our, maybe we're going to find out through our conversation, there's some pieces that aren't really fitting together and are not making sense to the student. A lot of times when I talk to schools, I find out they've admitted students on a rolling basis, but they're going to package their financial aid in the summer. Well, what about those students who were admitted in November? Are they going to have to wait all the way to July to find out their financial aid package? That's a conversation. That may not work, because while that student's waiting for their financial aid package, two things may happen. Another school may invite them to be a student, and they may go there, or they may just say, you know what, I don't understand how, I'm glad I was admitted, but I don't understand how I'm going to pay. I'm not going to do this anymore. So often the dashboard will also allow us to uncover what I call the leaks, the places where we are not creating a single narrative of the story because we're not coordinated within ourselves. The dashboard allows us to coordinate our work internally so that we can tell a more single narrative to the student. So that's a little bit of that. So I'm going to go back here to the presentation and just to give you a couple of more slides. So, the summary, and then we're going to open it up to questions here in a minute. The summary of all of this is, let's try to do what we can with the existing application flow. You may need to go recruit more and things like that, but before purchasing more applications, purchasing more names, hiring more recruiters, are we doing the best job we can with the applications we already have? That is where I would start, because I think that it is a way of both being simpler with our own process, less expensive, and doing more for the students who apply. Look, the student who applies, at least they're saying, you've got my attention. Maybe they're serious, maybe they're not, maybe they're applying to 10 other places, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Let's say that student did apply to 10 other schools, and you're thinking, well, they're not serious. Truth is, of the 10 schools they applied to, the one that gives the best service is probably the one that's going to get them to enroll. So let that be us, Simple stuff. Here's the thing. in order to create an experience for the student that matters in today's world, is turning the old equation around. For most of higher ed, we provided a product. Well, here's our college, here's our application. If you apply, if you make it through, we'll give you a seat. It doesn't work anymore. It's not the student's responsibility to figure out how to be a student. It's our responsibility to bring them in as a student. So again, let's not make it, oh, student, here's this 10 steps to follow. If you figure them out, you can be a student. Let's take that burden off the student. Let's put the burden on us. It's our responsibility to get that student through the process, through a step-by-step, logical thing that makes sense to the student, okay? So I think it's time that we can open up to some questions. First of all, I just want to say before I get, here's my QR code, here's my email address. If you want me to come to your college and talk about it a little bit, let your consultant, Teresa and Marisol or Nishan or Nina know, or me directly, Steve Smith at trelliscompany.org, steve.smith.smith@trelliscompany.org. Here's my QR code. I'm happy to come out to your college and do this workshop with your team too, if it's helpful, or let your consultant know. But let's talk about some of the questions. I know we have a lot of conversation going on, so I'm going to go ahead and take the PowerPoint down now, Teresa and Marisol. Let's go ahead and open it up to some conversation.
Thank you, Steve. Great information. There was a lot of information. I know I had someone ask, was the recording going to be available? Yes, I would send it to you. Hopefully within the next few days, we'll send that recording out to you. Please let us know if you have any questions. I do want to propose a question. Do anyone right now have a dashboard that you're using on your campus? And you can just respond in the chat by saying yes or no. Tamika said, really good information. She tried to take as many notes as she could. So this webinar will be available, so I will definitely be taking it. Prairie View has a dashboard. Thank you, Soloria. Looks like Stillman, they're actively looking for a dashboard. So as Steve said, if you need us to come out and speak with you about it, we definitely can do that. Okay. We do have someone who said they do not have a dashboard at this time. Solaria, we do have a question in the chat saying if Prairie View can share what info they are capturing. So I'll let you respond to that.
And I want to talk to and Solaria, go ahead and respond to that question from Stillman College. I also want to respond to what Ms. Longoria is saying, which is we have a funnel, but so oftentimes when you have your admission software or something, it's going to talk about your admissions metrics only. So I got to talk about all those pieces that make the story common, because remember the story for the student is not just my application, my transcript, but it's my payment, my housing, my advising, all that stuff is what the student sees. So we really have to bring all of that student to bear, to the student, so that it's a experience that the student understands as a common narrative. So very, very good point. So Teresa, back to the question for Prairie View. Is that something that Prairie View, they can answer Stillman, or we want to talk about it here?
Yeah, they can, but it looks like Soloria did give a response. It looks like she's capturing most of the information that would be covered in admissions funnel and some of the information in the orientation funnel. So
okay, very good. And every college, you have your own story you're telling, but most colleges, it's very simple. Mm-hmm. What documents do you need from me? How am I going to pay for it? Where am I going to live? What do I do next? What do I do? How do I get started? And you've got to coordinate those pieces among all the offices so that the student is getting one story. So often we see the admissions office is sending out their information, financial aid office sending out their information, housing sending out their information, and we're not, as a team behind the scenes, constantly coordinating those multiple stories from a measurement perspective and from a coordination perspective so that the student sees it all as a single package. It's really easy to do, but we have to do it. And the dashboard kind of helps create that cohesion.
Do we have any more comments or questions? Thank you, Steve. Well, if you do have questions later on, as Steve said earlier, please just contact your institutional support consultant and we will be able to definitely help you. It looks like we have another comment. Financial aid and housing are among the biggest areas of concern. That's a comment from Prairie View.
Oh, and I see that quite a bit because those processes have some steps to them. But what I would say is that everybody who is responsible for the onboarding of new students needs to understand how many students are making it through the housing process and on what time frame. How many students are making it through the financial aid process and on what time frame. I've talked to schools. Again, sometimes I will have, admissions is doing its own thing. So we're admitting students and on a rolling basis. Makes sense. So they get the letter. Teresa, congratulations, you're admitted to the school. And this happens in February. And then silence happens until mid-July when we talk to them about financial aid and housing. Well, during that 6 months of silence, the student has moved on. So we have to make sure that we're talking about, okay, what are we doing and how are we making that happen? Are we packaging the students in a way that the student understands? Are we giving them housing? Or if we're not, is someone talking to the student, hey, Teresa, remember in July, we're going to talk to you about your financial aid. How's it going with the rest of your semester? Are we still engaging them? There are many, many ways of doing it, but often until we coordinate that work, we don't know. And that's the key.
Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned at the beginning, there will be a short survey that will pop up after this webinar. If you could just complete that for us, we will appreciate it. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you, Steve, for some great information. I know I've said this once before, but I will be sending out the webinar as soon as it becomes available. So thank you for your time. And if you have questions, just contact your ISC and we will be able to get those questions answered. Thank you so very much. Steve, did you have any last words that you want to say?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And let us know if we can go help you at your campus. We would be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.